Thanks, Pranoti. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today for your Geoscience Careers Circle. I'm really excited to share a project and a tool that I have been working on as a side project during my PhD at UC Santa Cruz called GROW, or Geoscience Resources on Opportunities in the Workforce. Can you go to the next slide, please? All right, so as I said, I'm a PhD student, and I, probably like you, have asked myself these questions throughout my geoscience education. What can I do with this degree when I'm done? And then of those many options, what jobs are a good fit for me, for my interests, my passions, what I would like out of my work, my career values, all of those things that go into finding a really fulfilling career. And then, once you have some idea of that, how do you even go about finding that job? Where do you start? What are the concrete, practical steps? So these questions might have brought you here today, and I want to tell you how the project I've been working on and this career tool I developed can help you address these questions for yourself. Next slide, please. So often in this conversation about geoscience careers, students want to know specifically, what can I do with my degree other than stay in academia, right? We're in the education system, we're surrounded by researchers and faculty and other people who have stayed in the academic system and are performing research or teaching. And so that's the example of geoscience career that we see every day as students. But there are many, many other career paths that we as geoscience students can follow. And some of those are represented in this really nice infographic from the American Geosciences Institute. So if you haven't seen this before, this is a really great starting point to check out as you start to think about other avenues, other career paths besides academia. So you can see that there are these colored circles on the inside of this circle diagram, and each one of those colors represents a different sector. So we've got nonprofits, academia as a sector, government, industry, and then broadly research. And then within these sectors, there are these different fields of interest, and those are the wedges you see represented here. And this spans from business and education and medicine to art, engineering, and law. So you can see there's a really broad diversity of options here, and then probably too small to see on this screen, but within each wedge, there are examples of different job titles. And something you'll learn as you go through this career exploration journey is that often geoscientists have jobs and roles that don't have the word geoscientist or geologist in the job title. So that's something to keep in mind as we go forward and you kind of expand your understanding of the geoscience workforce and what is available to you. Next slide, please. So the GROW project I'm going to tell you about really came out of these main ideas here on the screen, and as we're thinking about job opportunities for geoscience students. It's a fact that we learn transferable skills that make us really well suited to a range of jobs. These jobs could be inside academia, but also outside in government, industry, or the other sectors. Even though we have these skills and we're really well suited to these jobs, it can often be hard for us to figure out what those jobs are and how to make that transition. There are plenty of non-academic career resources out there, published by professional societies like AGU or GSA, or through universities. But we found that these resources that existed were not sufficiently reaching their audiences, or you as geoscience students. Another fact is that academic mentors often aren't super well equipped to help us navigate the non-academic workforce. And this is simply a result of them having stayed in academia themselves frequently. And so they just have never experienced that non-academic workforce. So with this in mind, I started this GROW project that I'm going to tell you about. If you could go to the next slide, Pranoti. So just to give you kind of a background of what this project was and how it came about, it was an NSF intern project. So NSF funded me as a graduate student to work on this internship, partnering with some partner outside of academia. And in this case, it was a professional society, the American Institute of Professional Geologists. And so I worked on this project called Developing and Disseminating Information Resources on Non-Academic Careers in the Geosciences. So kind of everything that I've been mentioning up to this point. And I just want to acknowledge the project team I worked with, including my collaborator, Heather Holton, who's at the Colorado School of Mines, my advisor, Adina, who is at Santa Cruz, and then also some folks at AIPG, Aaron Johnson and Wendy Davidson. So this was the project team that really helped move this forward and produce the tool that I'm going to tell you about today. Next slide, please. All right, so the project kind of started out with this big goal of creating and sharing a centralized database of geoscience resources, both existing, what was already out there, and new resources for undergrads and graduate students, as well as their mentors and their departments at universities. And we wanted to pay careful attention to sharing a really representative and inclusive picture of the geosciences. The key thing here really is the centralized database. So as I mentioned on a previous slide, one of the tricky things here is that resources exist, but it can be really hard for students like you to find them. So we wanted kind of a centralized, easy to access and navigate collection of resources. So I'll just step through some of the main parts of this project so you know how it came about. The first step was to go out and compile as many resources as we could find. So this included looking at places like AGU and GSA, different professional societies, universities, resources that were coming out of employers trying to help students find their way into different positions. So we compiled everything that we could find and then assessed it to make sure that it was timely, it was relevant, it was representative, and sharing information that was really helpful to students, providing really high quality advice and how-to. Having done that, we then were able to identify where there were gaps. So I'll show you a little bit about how we sorted these resources by sector. And we found that some sectors had more information available. For example, the government sector, there were some really great resources and webinars out there, while communications and policy sectors were less represented in the resources. So we wanted to make sure that these were all communicated really effectively to you. And so I partnered with geoscientists working in a bunch of different positions across these sectors, and they helped me figure out what it is that they think you should know if you're trying to assess whether you want to work in that sector or get your foot in the door and actually find a job. So I think that that content is really, really great because it's coming from people who are currently working there. They've gone through this process fairly recently. And so we've got all kinds of new content to fill those gaps. The third step of the project was kind of the building of the tool. So figuring out how to create and host a centralized database that you could access. And so what this turned into was building a website to host this collection and allow you to navigate through it in a really intuitive and helpful way. So that's what I'll share today is the product, the outcome, this website called Grow. And then finally, we are now in the process of sharing this widely throughout our community. So me being here today talking to you is of course part of that. And I really hope that you'll take this and bring it back to your universities, your classes, your peers, and your mentors, and share it with them as well. Next slide, please. All right, so this is the homepage of this website, this tool that we created. So if you navigate to it, you will see this landing page with all of the different aspects of the tool that you can access. So just to point out a few things that I'll then step us through, there are two pathways, one for geoscience students, there in that blue button, and then one for geoscience departments. And this is geared towards your mentors and your departments and includes advice to help them help you. So if you bring this back to your institutions, definitely share it with the people who are advising you, because that advice is geared toward helping them help you navigate this. Next slide, please. All right, so broadly, Grow in a nutshell, what is this? Really, it's a collection of career resources to help you find a job. Depending on what stage of the process you're at, there will be resources to help you through that. Maybe you're just starting to explore and figure out what options are out there, or maybe you know that you want to work in industry and you're wondering how the heck you find and get a job in industry. So the resources really span that progression through your career journey. The website includes the curated links to those existing resources that I talked about. So these are coming from professional societies and employers and all these other sources. And then, of course, this new content that I mentioned. So resources that we created with the help of current geoscience professionals and added that content to these resource collections. So we hope that this ends up being kind of your one-stop shop for geoscience non-academic career resources. So if you want to see profiles of geoscientists currently working, you can go to this site. If you're wondering, should I get an advanced degree? Do I need to get a geoscience license? There's information for that. There's also really specific information for each sector, and I'll tell you a bit more about that and how to find it. But this is really helpful for getting a sense of how things are different in the government world versus industry or nonprofit and how you can navigate those. We also have links to job boards, both generally and specific to geoscience, and example employers. So if you've ever thought, you know, I'd really like to work in industry, but I'm not sure what kind of companies hire geoscientists, there are a bunch of example employers that you can use to get started in figuring that out. So with that nutshell, I want to give you a little tour. If you could go to the next slide, please. Just to give you a sense of what's there and hopefully set you up to go explore this on your own and have some concrete next steps for thinking about your own career. So I'll give you a whirlwind tour, and then at the end, I'm happy to take questions or go back and discuss the information and the resources in any particular section. All right, so here we go. This is the kind of broad layout of the website in schematic form. As I mentioned, there's two pathways, one side for departments, one side for students. I'll just briefly mention the information for departments. We'll focus on the student side today, but just so you know, there is information there for your mentors to learn about the transferable skills that you are developing and how to market those to employers. There's information about the workforce and how it's changed, some data on the workforce evolution and kind of outlook where we're headed. And then there's information about career values, diversity and inclusion, and making sure that we're helping each other find careers that really match our personal values and what we're looking for. So just so you know, that is there. You can direct your advisors, your mentors to those resources. But we're going to focus on the student side. And this includes these kind of 5 main pathways that are highlighted here. Find a community, advice from recent graduates, which can be really helpful, especially these days with kind of the ongoing pandemic and how that's changed the workforce and also the job search. And then there's career pathways and career profiles to get you started thinking about what you might want to do. And then that final section there, jobs by sector, is kind of the big sorted by sector collection of resources once you have an idea of where you might want to go. Next slide, please. Oh, next one. There we go. All right, so if we navigated to the For Students tab, we'd end up on this landing page. And I just want to point out the different parts that you can navigate to from this, and then we'll dig into them a little more so you know which is in each. So along that top bar, you'll see career pathways and career profiles. These are sort of your main entry points to start exploring the broad range of jobs out there. So for pathways, it'll tell you a little bit about what geoscientists do, what the workforce looks like. There's lots of different resources in there that I'll mention. And then career profiles are profiles of individuals who have one of many jobs, and they'll tell you what that is like day to day. So that's a good starting point. The jobs by sector we'll dig into in a little bit. And then I want to start with these main tabs that say find your fit and advice from recent grads. If you could go to the next slide. So if we go and click on advice from recent grads, you'll find this carousel of profiles of people who graduated very recently, and they have a bunch of different jobs, whether it's in industry, education, working for the government. And I think these profiles are a great starting point because they're very recent graduates. They've found jobs in the pandemic. They've got a really cool range of jobs and some that you might not think about. So for example, Ezra, profiled here, has a job working for a finance company as a data solutions analyst. So Ezra is doing a lot of data processing that was related to what she did in her PhD, but she's working basically for a bank. And that's not necessarily something you might think about when you're doing your degree in biogeochemistry. So if you start there, those are really great profiles to check out, and I would encourage you to read through those. Next slide, please. And then I want to mention find your fit. If you are just kind of getting started in your journey and you're not sure, what's out there for jobs, but also what's out there for support and what kind of communities you might want to join to support you through this process. So in this section, there are a bunch of links to these communities. Some are to community resources and some are to organizations where you could join, find mentors, and really start connecting with people. If you could go to the next slide. So here under join a community, there's a long list that's cut off at the bottom, but you'll find many, many societies and organizations that you could join. Many have either student options or they're just free membership. So you can check those out and find a community that really aligns with your own identity and things that you're looking for out of your geoscience career. Next. All right, so having done that kind of introductory, figure out where you fit in the geosciences, you can start thinking about pathways. And so this is the homepage of the career pathways section of the website. And right up top, there's this great webinar. It's a two-part webinar that gives you an overview of the workforce and all of these different sectors that we're going to talk about. And the website here is actually organized according to those sectors. So this is a really good starting point for kind of getting oriented. Next slide, please. And then I'm just putting this up to give you a sense of the many different resources that you could find under this same section. So on the left here, these light blue boxes, these are just some of the resources that come in, mixed media, which I think is really nice. There's some webinars, there's interactive exploration websites, there are infographics and different videos. So you'll get a really good sampling of perspectives on career paths, and you'll be able to do it in a way that matches your learning style. If you'd rather watch a webinar or you really want to dig into some infographics and written content. And these are mostly published by professional societies that have put a lot of work into sharing for education and career development, all of these resources to help you navigate it. And then here on the right is some new content that we developed to help you figure out exactly how much education and preparation you need for different kinds of careers. So often undergraduate students will ask, should I get a master's if I want to do X, Y, or Z? If you're considering going to graduate school, figuring out whether you should get a master's or a PhD. Those are those top 3 panels here with the different degree paths. And you can go and read more about what's typically expected or necessary for different sectors and different jobs. And then we've also included information about licensing and certification, which is something that students often are not taught because their academic mentors never needed to be licensed. But often if you're going into, say, an industry job, having a professional geologist license can be really helpful and in some cases necessary. So these sections of GROW have information on that collected from the people who offer the exams for the licensing and also societies that are trying to help students prepare for that process. Next slide, please. So here's just a quick snapshot of that. If you've never heard of the ASBOG exam or professional geologist license, this is a good place to go to learn what that is and if you need one, or if you should think about taking these exams while you're still in school or just graduating. So check that out if that is interesting to you. Next slide. Great, so that was the career pathways section. I know this is kind of a whirlwind tour, so we can revisit any of this in questions later. But we're gonna move on to this career profiles because I think this is a really nice collection for you to be aware of. It's pretty common for societies and other organizations that share career information to interview geoscientists and then put together a collection of those interviews so that students like you can go and read or listen to a geoscientist say, what does their day-to-day work look like? What do they like about their job? How did they get their job? And so under career profiles, we've collected a bunch of these profiles from various places. Some are very specific, say to meteorology, while some are broad, kind of across the geosciences. Next slide, please. So this is just kind of a snapshot. There's a bunch of collections. And so if you want to just get started thinking about what it looks like to be a geoscientist doing different kinds of things, this is a great place to do that. Next slide. All right, so to reorient us, we're back on this little schematic. We just went through the first 4 blocks of the for students section. So we looked at find a community, advice from grads, career pathways, and career profiles. And I just want to end by going through jobs by sector. This is what I think is maybe most helpful if you are reaching graduation, you're really trying to figure out specifically what it is you want to do. Jobs by sector will help you navigate that and actually get to answering the question, how do I find the job once I know what I want? If we could go to the next one. Okay, another schematic for you. Within jobs by sector, we've divided the workforce up into these 6 sector categories. We have government, industry, education, communication, nonprofits, and policy. And we've divided them this way because there are groupings in how the workforce and the job search are similar within these categories. But I do want to just say that these are fluid boundaries, right? So there's plenty of overlap between the sectors, and it's very common for geoscientists to start working in one sector and transition into another. So if you think back to that circle diagram from the AGI infographic, between those wedges and those overlapping circles, there's a lot of fluidity, and you shouldn't necessarily feel like you will be pigeonholed into any one of these. We've just organized it this way to make it easy for you to navigate and understand where the differences are. So having said that, I'm just going to show you an example of what is within each one of these categories. There will always be a get started page. So if you navigate to government or to education, you'll land on a page that just gives you an introduction to what that sector involves, what kinds of jobs are typically represented in that sector, and then kind of a step through of what to do next to learn more. Each one of these sectors has an Ask an Expert section, which I'm going to tell you more about and am really excited to share. There's Explore Employers for each sector. So this will vary a little bit depending on what types of jobs and employers are typically in each sector. And then the last section for each one of these is career preparation. And this will be tailored really specifically to each sector. So this is information on what you need to do to make sure you're a competitive applicant, how you can find internships or fellowships in each one of these sectors. Often there are kind of get your foot in the door opportunities that are specific to, say, communications versus government jobs. So career preparation will really help you tailor your approach and your preparation to the sector that you are thinking about applying to. Next slide. So I'm going to just show you the government section as an example. You'll see across the top here, there are those 4 tabs that I just talked through. So we've landed on the home page here for geoscience jobs in government. Next slide. So on that Get Started page, for each one of the sectors, there will be kind of a numbered list that is intended to help you navigate this in a really intuitive and logical way. And it'll walk you through these other tabs. So you can definitely go to the home page of the sector you're interested in and just follow through these steps. Next page. All right, the second tab that I definitely want you to take note of and go check out is our Ask an Expert profile page. This is similar to those career profile collections that I mentioned, but these are all brand new profiles that we collected as part of this project. So I reached out to, I think, almost 70 geoscientists who completed these profiles, and they are specifically tailored for the audience of GROW, or for you, job-seeking geoscience students. So we asked these professionals, how did you get to your job? Can you tell us a bit about your career path and its windiness, or its linearity? And in most cases, these scientists have had really non-linear career paths. And so they've written in these profiles how they got from where they started to where they are now. And hopefully that will help kind of inform your journey as well. They also gave really specific advice about their sector. So here in government, these profiles have responses about where these scientists see the sector moving in future years and how students can prepare to get jobs in the future. And so I think that it's really targeted and specific advice that you will find useful. And all these scientists also just have really interesting and fun positions, and it's really fun to read how they got to where they are today. So I definitely encourage you to check out our Ask an Expert, and Pranoti is featured on one of these pages, so you can go find her if you want. Next slide. All right, explore employers, I've mentioned a couple of times and just want to briefly show you here for government. These are a bunch of different agencies featured on this page, and so you can link from here to the agency career pages to learn more about what it's like to work at NASA or the EPA. And these are some really great external resources compiled here for you. This will look a little different for something like nonprofit. If you go to that sector, there will be links to different example nonprofits that geoscientists tend to look for jobs at. Next slide. All right, and finally, the career preparation page that I mentioned. This, as I said, is tailored really specifically to each sector. So you might be aware that in the US in particular, looking for federal jobs can be fairly complicated, and navigating that application process takes a lot of both time and awareness of how it works. And so the first thing you see here on this page is a webinar about navigating the federal job search. And there's a lot of specific information here that's specific to government. It's not applicable if you're looking for an industry job, but if you think that you might want to apply to an agency, a state agency, even local government in the US, there's some really great resources here. Next page. And then just a few more things to mention. Each of these career preparation pages will often have internships or different programs that are designed to help you navigate the transition from your undergraduate or your graduate degree into these government positions in this case, but in other sectors, it might be specific to getting into policy or getting into communications. And so you can see here, this spans from internships with different agencies to some federal programs that are designed to help you get these government jobs. All right, I think with that, we can go to the next slide. Okay, finally, there are a bunch of links here to job boards. If you've gotten all the way through this content and you are ready to start looking for jobs, you can go through this list and pull out some that are relevant to the types of jobs you would be looking for. And there's also information on keywords. And not shown on this slide is a bunch of written content about how searching for geoscience jobs can be tricky and how you can use keywords to do that effectively. You might remember at the beginning I mentioned that geoscientists often have job titles that don't have the word geoscientist in them. And so keywords are an important way to make sure that you're finding the right jobs for what you're looking for. Next slide. All right, so to wrap up that whirlwind tour, I'll just leave it on this slide. The address for this website is grow-geocareers.com. And so if you go there, you can go explore more deeply, go back through the workflow that I just showed you. And depending on where you are in your job search, you might want to start all the way back at career pathways and profiles, or maybe you already know that you want to work in a specific sector and you're going to go check that out first. So I'll stop there. We'll take some questions and we can discuss more deeply if you have specific interests. But thank you for coming and listening. And I'm really excited to share this with you, and I hope it's useful.
Great job, Maddie. We'll take questions now. We have about 20 minutes or so left. So if people have questions, maybe you can type them into the question box. And I guess while people are getting their sort of fingers ready to type, I thought maybe I could ask you a question. When we polled all the members in this circle, most of them were students. Many of these students don't live in the US. They are studying in Africa, they're in different other countries and continents. Do you have information in this website that also pertains to sort of non-US based, say, government, or are there international sort of jobs and opportunities also in your website?
Yes, so I would say that all of the sectors that I listed would be applicable internationally, except for the government tab, because that mainly focuses on the US government jobs. However, I think it's still useful broadly if you're interested in figuring out, what types of roles you might have. It's just that the career preparation, how do you get these jobs, is going to be pretty specific to the US. But just to give you an example, if you are a student in another country and you're interested, say, in communications, and you might want to get a science writing job, if you go to that sector, those resources are going to be applicable kind of across country boundaries, because it's really about the type of role, the responsibilities, what is needed, and then the skills that you either have or can develop to make you really successful. And that's, applicable anywhere. So definitely just pay attention if there is, government information that's specific to the US, but it's absolutely still useful if you're in another country.
Okay. I know this question has come up many times, in the past. I used to be a college professor, so I remember this. Most government jobs, say if you're looking for government jobs in the US, sometimes it's very hard to navigate, like you were saying, the USA Jobs website. Are there other companies or organizations that like employ geoscientists that then do projects for the government? I mean, like contractors. And if there are such entities, how do you find those? Is that information also on the web page?
Yes, that is a great question. I would say starting with the industry resources is maybe the best place to figure out how those relationships work. So for this tool specifically, we did have example employers included that are often contractors. And so that might be a good place to start as an example, just to see, what kind of company is this? How would I, find a job with this kind of company? And then what on their website maybe is giving me information about how contracting is done. And there is some more broad information about, what is a contractor, what is a consultant, that could be a helpful starting point. But definitely there are ways to work with the government that is not just getting a federal or a state position. Yeah. And that's true in, the communication sector as well. So there are examples there, especially in the Ask an Expert profiles. There are a couple people who have kind of contracted to be science writers with an agency, even though they might not be directly employed.
Great. So Liz and Waverly, I'm not sure if I'm seeing any hands. I can't tell. Maybe you are monitoring that. No hands. Oh, there are someone's hand up. Somebody's asking a question. So we have Yulisa Perez Rojas is asking a question. I'm going to unmute you, and maybe if you have a microphone, you can speak. You can speak now. Ask your question.
Yeah, hi. Hello. Thank you so much for this resource in this presentation. It's very helpful, especially I'm trying to finish my PhD in the next year, so I need to figure out what I'm going to do. So this is very, very helpful. My question to you is, does this resource have a way to filter positions that don't require you to be a US citizen? Like you said, you can work for the government, but it doesn't have to be for the government. There's projects that work within that. But is there any way there's a way to figure out the jobs that don't require US citizenship?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's not a direct way to filter as if you were on a job board and you were trying to put in criteria and filter that way. The website isn't constructed with that feature, but this kind of goes back to what Pranoti asked, and we were just talking about thinking about consulting or contracting with the government. So what I would say is if you know that you would not be eligible for a federal US jobs position that you would find through that platform, you can search for jobs according to the advice in those other sectors. So for example, industry, or if you want to work in more of like an education or communications role, perhaps in like an outreach section of an agency, just off the top of my head. For those positions, you could take the advice from whatever sector most closely matches and then go to the job boards that are linked. And then you would be able to filter that way using keywords and then put in the criteria saying, this can't be a federal job. I want to work for a private company or a nonprofit organization that's related to maybe a government agency. So yeah, just to clarify, like there's not active jobs listed on the GROW website. What we've done is compiled kind of general resources and really specific advice to then have you go to a job board and be able to search for positions through those. So I hope that helps. I think that there's definitely plenty of information for you to kind of navigate that. I think just digging into those sector-specific resources will help a lot.
So
Thanks
maybe
for your question.
Yeah, that was a great question. So while we're waiting for other questions to come through, I was just wondering, it's sort of a parallel question to the one that was just asked. Is there a way to sort of sort things on the website based on like your level of education? Like say, you have a PhD, but you're looking for very specific. So is there a way to do that, parse the information by your degree, or like how much education you have?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Mostly it's going to be like, for example, if you go to ask an expert, there's going to be representative jobs and advice kind of across career paths. So there's going to be some element of you filtering that. It's not going to necessarily only show you profiles from people who had an undergraduate degree. But I do think that reading through those is really helpful because it can tell you for this specific job, you know, this person got a master's degree in something totally unrelated and then pivoted and did a geoscience position. So it's more anecdotal. It's less of like a quantitative, filterable like quantity. And part of that is because the workforce is so dynamic, and one of the things that makes it hard to navigate is that there's no one way to do anything, right? So it's really about your skill set and how you can leverage that and market that. So I think what we really tried to do in building this was to frame the information and your approach to it in terms of those skills. And so that could look different depending on your background, right? You could have a bachelor's degree in, you know, say psychology, and then a master's degree in environmental science, and be totally qualified for a job in geoscience. Whereas, you know, maybe someone has their bachelor's degree in environmental science and is also qualified for the same job. So I think the best way to go about it is to learn from the example profiles and the more general information saying what is typical for different sectors and sort of how other people navigate this, and then reflect on your own skills, your own qualifications, and try to see where you fit into that. And I know that might be frustrating that there's not like a one good answer of like, just push this button and here's a list of jobs you could have. But it really is dependent on your skills. And, you know, you're a totally unique individual. Your skills, your background, your experiences, those in a really positive way make you like uniquely equipped for a specific role. And what we want to do is help you figure out what that is and then get that job. So hopefully this tool helps you navigate that really nebulous space where it's not just a black and white A to B, check these boxes and get a job kind of thing.
Right. I think for that you have to go to the job boards and create a profile for yourself, and then do an actual search based on where you want to live or what sector you're interested in. That will help. So you have to do this basic research, kind of get to know what you want to do before you take the deep plunge into the careers. I think is what the point you were trying to make. Yeah. I
Yes,
was also,
thanks for summarizing that.
yeah. So I was also wondering if, you know, you contacted like HR, the human resources, you know, departments of many of these employers. You know, was there any kind of guidance from that aspect, you know, of job interviews, or how to write, you know, like a cold email? Do you have those kinds of things in your website anywhere?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Those are not directly on the website, but there are external links that will take you to that kind of more general career preparation and job, I guess job preparation is what I would say for that interviewing. There is some really good advice from people who recently went through the hiring process that gives some of that HR input. We don't have interviews or direct advice from people in HR, but you can kind of get a sense of that by reading about these geoscientists who will say, you know, you are going to apply to this company, you need to have these keywords in your resume that match the job listing to make sure that you get through the HR person who has no idea really what a geoscientist is doing. And then a scientist is going to end up with your application, and they're the ones probably interviewing you. So there is some information around that, but the kind of specific resume prep is linked externally. We didn't kind of reinvent the wheel on that.
Yeah. So
sounds like we have a lot of really great resources. One of the questions that came in, you kind of already answered this. They asked, how would an experienced geoscientist in career transition use this site? So not early career, but someone who's already, worked quite some time trying to figure out what's next. You kind of covered different aspects of how to use the site, but what about maybe give like 3 steps for an experienced professional coming in and where to look?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that the helpful information is mainly going to live in those jobs by sector tabs. So just imagining, like, if you were working in industry and you really wanted to transition into nonprofit, you've got the experience, you've navigated the kind of general career decision making before, and you probably are just looking for really specific information about, what does that nonprofit job look like, and really how do I get my foot in the door. That information is going to be in the jobs by sector, both in the example employers and the career preparation tab. So just to give another concrete example, I learned a lot about communications when I was building this resource, and differences between being a staff writer, a science writer, versus a freelance science writer. So if someone wanted to transition into a communications position, having experience, maybe as like a field technician or something very different, that communications by sector page would have really specific information about the differences in being, freelance versus employed, and how you would find those different jobs, and different communities you could join in order to make sure that you're kind of tapped into those networks. And that's true across the sectors. So I think that those pages specifically would probably be what you're looking for.
Liz, are there any questions that are coming into the Mentoring365 platform, perhaps? Maybe others, some folks are maybe been typing questions there. I'm just guessing because I haven't seen any of the questions pop up. So if you have a minute, if you could look there. So I know we have about 10 minutes left, and we'll continue to take questions. But I just do want to jump to the next slide here, because I think this very much ties and is very much related to what you were saying, Madison. Our next meeting of the circles, we are going to be talking exactly about some of these things that you were telling us about. We're going to integrate, who you are, like what are your values. I think you alluded to that earlier on, and how do you sort of leverage, what skills you have into finding that career, finding that job. And the speaker who's going to be talking about this is actually a colleague of yours, Maddie. You pointed out Heather Holton, who works at the Colorado School of Mines. She's worked on a different project with another organization to create a whole course that a student or an early career professional could take, sort of enroll in, and take that course to kind of figure out some of these answers to some of those really important questions that you were asking about before. So I hope that all the folks who are here at the meeting today will come to this next meeting, because this is sort of the logical next step to, to take what we learned from your website to now actually do the hard work of applying it and looking for that answer that everybody wants, like, what am I suited for? What am I prepared for? What is important to me, and things like that. So I just wanted to sort of bring this to everyone's attention. Liz or Waverly, did you find any questions? Yep.
Well, we have 2 more in the
Oh, great.
chat. Someone is wondering how helpful for non-geoscientists is this website, for example, engineers?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's pretty broad in the kind of geoscience umbrella. So there's, anything from being kind of an ocean technician to some of the more engineering sides of geology. I think it would depend on exactly what kind of engineering you were talking about. This is probably not going to be useful for a chemical engineer or civil engineer. Perhaps some of the example employers are useful if you're, a civil engineer thinking about trying to work for a state agency. That could be useful in a more general sense, but it's really geared toward geoscience in the broadest sense possible, including environmental science and some of our kind of, sister departments that you might find at a university.
Okay. He says petroleum engineer.
Okay, for petroleum, there are definitely resources there. particularly in industry, you would find some useful stuff. Yeah.
We have another question kind of about the job board. Does it have a notification system when we can get in our email when jobs are posted?
That's going to be something that you would want to take the link from Grow to the external job board and then figure out in that job board platform. So we do not have jobs listed on the Grow platform. Those are all just a collection of job boards for you to know what's out there and get started. So that's going to vary depending on which one you're talking about.
Those were the only questions that came in, Liz, so far?
So far on the WebEx, I thought I saw something trickle in on circles, but can't locate it.
Okay. So yeah, so these external job boards, those are great examples. So many of the professional societies have this. I think Maddie, you were showing a nice collection of those job boards. I know that the one that AGU has, they're definitely, as a job seeker, you can make a profile and you can get those alerts. When you've made some choices about the location or the sector or what it is you're looking for, you do get alerts, and I would imagine it would be similar for other job boards. So I'll give you another moment there if you can find it, Liz. Otherwise, we'll see if there any other questions pop up. I cannot see any of the questions, by the way, so I'm so glad you're looking for these. Does anybody want to raise their hand and ask a question? I know how to unmute you. That I do know. Okay. Is there any other questions? This looks like somebody's trying to type something. No?
We got a question, how do you create alerts on Grow? But it sounds like you do that on the other sources.
Do that on the other site, exactly. I think the most useful thing that you'd get out of Grow for that specific job searching question is the link to the job boards that are probably most relevant for the kinds of jobs you're looking for, and then the keywords. So knowing what to set your alerts to make sure that you're not missing things. So you would start there with Grow, and then you could move over to those job boards.
Okay, so I'm gonna put the website back so that people can see. If you didn't get a chance to write it down, those of you who are in this meeting, you will absolutely be getting sort of a link to the recording, and hopefully even sort of a PDF of this PowerPoint, so that you can follow along the path you take to get the most out of this website. Liz, it looks like maybe somebody's still typing a question. Somebody has their hand up. I think I'm going to unmute them. Solomon, I think you have a question. Let's see. I can't seem to. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Yeah,
Okay.
I got it.
Okay. I was also doing it. You were doing it. So we were both. I'll stop.
Now it says self-muted.
Okay.
There they go.
Unmuted. Go for it, Solomon.
Hello.
Hi, we can hear you. Go ahead. Ask your question.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for this presentation. I think this is awesome. This is something I would I would really love to also have seen a long time ago, because the geoscience field has a lot of resources, but they are scattered across the whole place. So you have to go to specific places. But then what I want to talk about is more of a suggestion than a question. But if you consider a question, I would appreciate an answer also. So yeah, I consider this a resource platform. So it contains a lot of things, including um, graduates, opportunities, job, and all of those things. Now, my first suggestion is this concerning graduate opportunities, because I see that there are professors of different universities that are looking to recruit graduate students. So if there is a column on this or a page on this website that features stuff like that, so professors can always make their suggestion or submit their request, and then students who are looking to further their research in that area can apply or can easily get access to these things. I've been a victim of this before, also seeking graduate student opportunity, but there were times that before I could see certain opportunities, the deadline already passed. So what happened recently with a professor in Texas Tech University. So he's recruiting PhD students for reservoir modeling, and he expects that all communications to come in before January 12th. By the time I saw it, it was just a few days ago. So it really passed already. So most times all of these informations are just everywhere. So sometimes you post on LinkedIn, sometimes you just find it on Twitter, sometimes you just anywhere it can be. But then if it is featured on this website, and I think it will be a great place for students to always come to always check it out, and also whatever thing they are looking for. I understand that you cannot always post job opportunities, but then graduate opportunities are something that you may want to consider. Also, considering journals and resource materials, I understand that some journals are locked. That means you have to pay to get access to them, but there are some open access journals also. You can feature. Is it okay? Let me just say, is it possible to feature a page where um, I can reference to maybe SCG library or the EAG journal, the leading edge. All of this leading edge is published every month. So, if I can at least get some students don't know about leading edge. So then from this website too, they can get information on the leading edge. So, these are just some of the things I really thought about. This is a great thing. Geoscience resource on opportunities in the workforce is so great. It's awesome. And, I'm part of the people that's going to spread the news across because I think it's going to be useful for a lot of people. So good job, Madison, and everyone that worked on this. Great.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Solomon.
you.
Yeah.
Thanks for your comments too. I do want to just mention, since we were focused on non-academic careers, we didn't kind of expand the scope of this to graduate school applications. And as you were mentioning, trying to host some sort of collection of current opportunities. However, I do want to just mention a program that I've been working with called GEMS, or Geoscience Education and Mentorship Support. You can check that out as a place to get that kind of support and some collections of resources around open graduate positions. And we could definitely build a bridge between GEMS resources and GROW resources. So as you say, if you go to GROW and you read through the degree information and you think, I should go to graduate school, GROW could then send you over to GEMS to get access to those specific resources. So that's a great suggestion. Thank you for that. And then in terms of the publications, I'm not really sure exactly how we would integrate that. I think it's a little outside the scope of the project, but I really appreciate your comments.
Yeah, that was good. That was a great comment and a compliment to the fantastic work you've done. And I liked your suggestion of how maybe, you might have another version, or you may be working on this still, and you might have a few more key things to send folks to the kinds of feedback you're getting. You said you're in a dissemination phase. So hopefully, there'll be more to come, but I want to be respectful of everybody's time. We are absolutely over our time. So thank you very much, Maddie, for your time today. And thank you to all our attendees for listening and asking some fantastic questions. Thank you so much.